At the turn of the millennium, the team at Relic Entertainment had just released their first game, Homeworld, a real-time space strategy game that garnered critical acclaim and praise from gamers and critics alike. But instead of immediately working on a sequel to their success, like I'm sure many developers would, the studio would choose a different path, and their next project would end up being quite different. Released to the world 4 years after Homeworld, Relic's next endeavour was a somewhat obscure but charming real-time strategy game in which you become a DNA splicing zoologist warmonger. And yes, I know it sounds ridiculous, but just hear me out. Thinking back to when I first played Impossible Creatures in 2003, I can't remember why or how I even really discovered it. I was around 10 years old at the time, so it's not like I was looking specifically for games by Relic or anyone else for that matter. After a quick Google search while actually making this video, I discovered there was a demo for the game, so I can say that's most likely my gateway drug into the game, so to speak. As I've mentioned in other videos, my games library back in those days was basically whatever game demos that were hot at the time, plus a small library of titles on disc that my dad owned. So after getting a lot of value from the Impossible Creatures demo, probably more than people intend, I pestered my parents enough to buy me the full version of the game for my birthday. Of course, I still have the discs and manuals, one of my most prized possessions. Come to think of it, I'm pretty sure that was actually my first full retail copy that was mine and mine alone. At the time, it was my dream come true, and I proceeded to put an incalculable number of hours into playing the game's campaign and fighting against the AI, as well as the odd occasion of playing against a friend over an extremely tumultuous dial-up internet connection. And although I had no idea at the time, the game had a lot of expectations on its shoulders as the next release from the makers of Homeworld. It was received well by most outlets on release, though some were disappointed with its gameplay features not living up to the game's title and premise. Speaking of which, the base of Impossible Creatures gameplay is a relatively fast-paced strategy game along the lines of something like, say, Warcraft 3 or Dawn of War. Its quirkiness is evident right from the moment you boot it up, as you always begin a game with a flying train as a home base. Yes, you heard that correctly. A flying train powered by coal. There's not a ton of building variety in the game, and there's no different races or civilizations like you'd find in nearly every other title in the genre. So you might be asking, where's the variety? Where's the differences? Well, as the title of the game suggests, it's in the creatures. The impossible creatures. They're the units that you take into battle. To form your army, you're given 9 slots, and each of them can be filled with a hybridization of 2 animals out of the 51 that the game offers to you, which can later be up to 76 with a couple of expansion packs the game received. And animals have their own specific traits that can be used to their advantage, so you can mix and match to get the best of both. For example, if you put the wings of an eagle onto a bear, it's going to allow it to fly. Or if you attach the tail of a chameleon onto a turtle, it can camouflage. And these slots can be edited on the fly in the campaign, but they're locked in before you start a skirmish game, so you have to have an army decided before you get into it. And while any 2 animals can be combined, not all of them are obviously going to be effective, and contrasting to that, there's obviously quite a few that stood out as better than average. Combinations like the building destroying eagle lobster, or camouflaging and quick chameleon cheetah being some that come to mind. And this is where the uniqueness of the game lies, giving the ability to create armies of beasts of your own choosing. There's solid progression in the campaign in this respect, as throughout its 15 missions you're tasked with collecting animals in the game world, with a lot of larger and more powerful creatures being made available later on in the game, so it gives a good sense of progression going from the start to the end, where at the start you're using things like porcupines, and at the end you might have sperm whales and crocodiles. The missions are set across a fictional archipelago in the South Pacific, where the climate ranges from desert to tundra depending on what island, which gives a really good contrast when you're moving through the campaign. It's a character-driven narrative, and it doesn't take itself too seriously a lot of the time, though it definitely still has some pretty emotional, heavy moments. The game makes you care about its 2 protagonists, who are Lucy Willing and Rex Chance, and if you can get past their admittedly blocky exteriors, there's actually a lot of personality to them. The villains, on the other hand, are effective, although they're very larger than life, so to speak, and they have names that could really only exist in fiction. You've got the Mastermind, Upton Julius, his mad scientist, Dr. Ganglion, his mistress, Valika Lepet, and his muscle, Whitey Hooten. Gameplay wise, it offers solid difficulty throughout its 10 to 20 hour stay depending on how much you played it and the difficulty you're at, and even for people who have played RTSs before it should still be a good challenge. It's your standard strategy fare. Players start with a base and you expand and build armies until you can successfully crush your enemy, or enemies in some cases. The fun of it comes from seeing whose Frankensteinian animals will destroy the other, and the post-game conversation that follows. Damn dude, your crocodile lobster rush was good, but my endless army of chimpanzee giraffes just couldn't be stopped. Classic. The uniqueness really sets this game apart from its peers and presents an interesting dynamic for real-time strategy games that few have captured since then. The main difference to the moment-to-moment gameplay here is that unlike other RTS games, there's no real rock, paper, scissors situation. In something like Age of Empires 2, generally, if you play a horse, it's going to be an archer. Pikes will then beat horses, swordsmen will beat pikes, and archers will beat swordsmen. But in Impossible Creatures, that meta doesn't really exist because there's just so many unit variations. So you've got to get in deep to find out the counters that exist in the game, but they're not as simple as X beats Y. So often matches will just end up coming down to a matter of who has the most lobster plus huge mammal hybrids. And there's some creature combinations that are always going to be best for their level, hands down. And I think the game is more fun when players don't know these combinations, as the enjoyment of playing against another player is seeing the variety of different creatures that come up against each other, not just having the same armies because the eagle lobster is the best level 4 and the sperm whale lobster is the best level 5 creature. Speaking of playing against others, if you're hoping to play multiplayer, you might want to rope in a friend into buying the game nowadays as well. Its community around it is nowhere near something like Age of Empires 2, but in saying that, I'm sure you can find someone to play with if you're willing to seek them out. There's a few people on Steam who are in the game, so you might be lucky. As for game modes, the game's also a bit lacking here as well, as there's unfortunately only 3 modes on offer when you're playing Skirmish. You can choose between Destroy Enemy Lab, Destroy Enemy Base, or Hunt Wrecks, with the latter giving all players their own Wrecks chance, kind of like a king unit, whose death will see the player lose the match. However, the gameplay definitely still holds up today, and it's just as enjoyable as it used to be to splice a bunch of animals together and have them fight to the death. While Impossible Creatures' soundtrack and general audio experience is nothing to write home about, it suits the game and it effectively conveys the mood that it's going for. It has its high points in the campaign for sure, where the music is great as an appropriately charming backdrop to the story, especially in its more dramatic moments. Personally, I think quite highly of the soundtrack and I still get my twangs of nostalgia when I listen, but obviously that's not going to apply to everyone. Other aspects of the audio hold up just as well and do a good job in bolstering the gameplay, such as buildings having their own great unique sound bites that serve to differentiate one from another. The creatures sound great as well, the noises of which are determined by what head the animal has. They also, I think, did a really stellar job in giving sounds to animals that don't normally make much or any noise in the real world, like a lobster or a fish. And I think both sound what you might think they would if they were scaled up to the size of a rhinoceros or an elephant. Something I didn't expect to hold up so well is the voice acting by both the protagonists and villains in the campaign, effectively conveying Rex and Lucy's personal struggle against Julius and his lackeys. And while it's undeniably campy, I think all the actors did a great job in delivering their lines, and it gave the characters a lot of life throughout the game's narrative, and it's something that absolutely raised the campaign's quality overall.
Run! He's taking control of them!
Don't think this is over, Mr. Chance!
Thanks, fellas.
Although Impossible Creatures didn't receive as many expansions as I, or I'm sure many others, would have liked, it did get a couple of extras post-launch, and it was all for free, so that's always good. A bonus animal pack was oddly included in the game's files, but it required a free 1.5 meg download to quote-unquote unlock, which was kind of odd. It added 10 new creatures to the game, but they could only be used outside of the campaign, as throughout the campaign you're collecting the animals physically, so they couldn't really retrofit those in there. And the second batch of content was more substantial. It was called Insect Invasion, and it saw the addition of 15 new animals, some with some new abilities that hadn't been seen, as well as 6 new maps. Though the game did come with a map editor, so you could kind of get the new maps already. As the name of the pack suggests, it focused on bringing insects like spiders and beetles to the game, but it also added other animals such as the anaconda and the anteater, and all of which were really fun to splice with the animals that we had already, like making a whale-sized spider. Like I said before, the game did come with a map editor as well, and it saw many user-made maps and scenarios available to download over its lifespan. Speaking of user-created content, there was also a number of mods received over the years that added new things such as animals, abilities, and the aforementioned maps. But whether due to just the difficulty with working with the game, or just a lack of a large community, only a few received much attention, with projects such as Creature Chaos and Tellurian taking most of the spotlight, and they can still be downloaded today. Despite the game's seeming lack of modern relevance, I don't think I'd really heard anyone talk about it for at least half a decade. THQ Nordic ended up re-releasing the game on Steam and Good Old Games. For the Steam version, it saw additions of workshop support, re-implemented multiplayer, and cloud saves for both Steam and Good Old Games, and it also just fixed some issues with running it on modern systems, so you should be able to run it no worries on a Windows 10 computer with modern hardware without any issues, which I can't say for the original version if you have the disc. Deciding whether an older game is worthwhile to play now relies on a few things, such as its level of accessibility, cost, and its compatibility with modern systems. But one thing can make all of those mentioned irrelevant: fun. Is it fun? As our boy Reggie puts it,
if it's not fun, why bother?
If a game's not fun, then it doesn't matter how easy it is to access, how cheap it is, or how well it runs on a modern system. Just take a look at Bad Rats. Well, I'm happy to say that in my humble opinion, not only is Impossible Creatures still an enjoyable experience for strategy fans in 2018, it's now also super easy to play and run thanks to its Steam and Good Old Games release. It can also be found cheap. Right now it's on sale for about the price of a coffee, and I can wholeheartedly say it's worth it for those few dollars. And while I'm definitely biased to some extent, I'm doing my best in giving this recommendation as objectively as I can. Even if you've never played the game before and don't have the nostalgia that I or others have, you can easily get at least a few hours of fun out of it if you like the genre. It's unique, it's creative, and apart from the character models, it barely shows its age despite being nearly over 15 years old. So if you like strategy games and you want to either try something different or relive a classic from back in the day, then pick it up and make some Impossible Creatures of your own. Thanks for watching everyone, see you next time.